The night has grown quiet. The world outside your window settles into stillness, as if the rhythm of time itself has slowed. This is the hour for gentle wandering, not of the body, but of the mind. Tonight, we travel back to the Middle Ages, not into the halls of kings, nor the cloisters of monks, but into the fragile, fleeting world of childhood. You may imagine childhood now as a time of freedom and play. But in the Middle Ages, it was something altogether different. Children worked early, bore heavy duties, and carried the weight of expectations. For most, it was not a season of innocence, but a brief passage between dependence and labor, always shadowed by the uncertainties of survival. In this journey, you will walk in the small shoes of a medieval child, feeling the cold of morning, the hunger of lean seasons, and the endless demands of family and community. Then you will hear the story of royal children born into privilege, but burdened with destinies not their own. You will explore the rare traces left behind: toys, shoes, fragments of lives too often forgotten. And finally, you will see the contrast between the meager lives of peasant children and the elaborate educations of noble heirs. Let us begin slowly, gently. Close your eyes and picture a narrow wooden cottage, smoke curling faintly from its thatched roof. Inside, a child stirs on a straw pallet. It is dawn in the Middle Ages, and already the day calls. The air is cold. You wake to the soft light of dawn slipping through cracks in the timber walls. The smell of smoke lingers heavy and acrid from the hearth that smolders weakly in the corner. There is no time to lie still. Your day begins as soon as your eyes open. You are a child, but in the medieval world, childhood is not sheltered. It is brief, fragile, and quickly given over to duty. At 6 or 7, you already work. Your small hands gather twigs for the fire, fetch water from the stream, feed the chickens, and pull weeds from the field. You rise when your parents rise, and you labor when they labor. Play is rare and often woven into work itself, a moment of laughter shared while carrying heavy buckets, or a stick dragged in the dirt to mimic the plow your father drives. Your clothes are plain, coarse wool or linen, often patched, always hand-me-downs. In winter, they do little to keep out the cold. Your shoes, if you have them, are worn thin. The ground beneath your bare feet is rough, but you are used to it. The food is simple and scarce. Bread, dark and heavy. A thin pottage of beans or oats simmered slowly over the hearth. Sometimes a scrap of meat, but often not. Hunger is a familiar companion. Illness, too, is close. A cough lingers in your chest. Your belly aches when food is short. The village healer may bring herbs, but cures are uncertain. For many children, life ends early, before they grow to see adulthood. Yet you do not question this life. It is all you know. Your parents expect obedience. Your community expects labor, and your body bends into these rhythms as naturally as breathing. There are moments of gentleness. You may sit by the hearth at night, listening to your parents' low voices, or to tales whispered by an older sibling. You may find a carved wooden toy, simple and rough, passed from one child to another. You may run in the fields for a fleeting moment. The sun warm on your face before being called back to duty. But always, the weight of survival presses close. The world does not pause for your youth. You are needed. And so, even as a child, you labor as if already grown. This is the truth of medieval childhood. Not endless play, but endless tasks. Not freedom, but responsibility. A brief, demanding season of life, shaped by hardship and the fragile hope of survival. From the small cottage of a peasant family, we step now into a different world. The walls are no longer of timber and daub, but of stone. The roof is not thatched, but tiled, and high above the hall hang banners colored with gold and scarlet. This is the world of the nobility, and here we find the children of Eleanor of Provence. Eleanor was Queen of England in the 13th century, wife of Henry III, Her children were born into splendor, yet splendor did not mean ease. Their childhoods, though filled with privilege, were also burdened with expectation and shadowed by the weight of destiny. Picture the royal nursery. It is not a place of toys and idle laughter, but of watchfulness. Nurses and attendants surround the children, clothing them in fine fabrics, feeding them carefully measured meals. Even here, in their earliest years, the children lived not only as themselves, but as symbols of the realm. Eleanor bore many children, but we will think especially of her son, Edward. Later, he would be called Edward I, a king of war and stone castles. But as a child, he was simply a boy in the shadow of the crown. Imagine him at 6 years old, dressed in a miniature tunic, learning to carry himself with grace. His play was shaped not by fancy, but by practice. Wooden swords, small horses, games that trained the body and disciplined the mind. Every gesture was observed, every word remembered, for he was not only a child, but a future king. His sisters, too, lived lives bound to duty. They learned to read prayers, to sew fine cloth, to sing softly in chapel. But their lessons were not simply for their own virtue. They were preparation for marriages that would bind kingdoms together. From the moment they could walk, their lives were not their own, but threads woven into the fabric of diplomacy. There were moments of closeness, of course. The chronicles tell of Eleanor's devotion to her children, how she cared for them in sickness, how she guided their growth. In quiet hours, they may have sat together near the fire, listening to her stories of Provence, of songs and courts far away. But such tenderness was fleeting, for the pace of royal life pressed always forward. When Edward was only 12, his training became harder. He learned horsemanship, weaponry, and the stern lessons of command. His childhood, brief as it was, narrowed into discipline. He was not permitted the careless joys of peasant boys, nor the freedom of idle play. He was being shaped into a ruler, stone by stone, lesson by lesson. And yet, even amid privilege, fear remained. Disease struck without distinction. Eleanor's children, like those of peasants, were vulnerable. Several did not survive to adulthood, their names remembered only faintly in records. The walls of the palace could not keep out sickness, nor could crowns shield from grief. So, whether in cottages or castles, medieval childhood bore the same mark: brevity. For peasant and noble alike, it was a short season, swiftly overtaken by duty, danger, and destiny. As you imagine Edward, tall and solemn, even in his youth. Remember also the faces of the sisters who vanished in childhood, their lives cut short. The nursery is filled with both laughter and loss, privilege and burden. A reminder that childhood in the Middle Ages was never free from shadow. The voices of the royal nursery fade into silence. The stone walls crumble back into memory. Now we turn not to chronicles or royal accounts, but to the earth itself, where the smallest traces of medieval childhood still lie waiting. Archaeologists, with careful hands and patient eyes, sift through soil, rubble, and refuse. And from the ground emerge objects once held by children long forgotten. A small wooden doll, carved crudely yet tenderly, its features smoothed by countless fingers. Perhaps it was passed from one sibling to another, a rare comfort in a life of labor. A tiny shoe, its leather hardened and cracked, stitched roughly but with care. Its size speaks of a child no more than 5 or 6. Some shoes show signs of wear at the toes, as if little feet grew restless, scuffing the ground in play or impatience. Fragments of gaming pieces also appear, carved from bone, worn from use. They hint at moments of laughter around the hearth, where children imitated the games of adults. In these small objects, we glimpse sparks of joy amid lives otherwise ruled by work. But not all finds speak of play. Some tell of hardship. Child-sized shackles discovered in rare places, reminders that servitude and bondage could reach even the youngest. Graves of infants, buried with beads or tokens, show how fragile life was and how deeply loss was felt. Archaeology paints a picture, both tender and tragic. The toys remind us that children laughed, dreamed, and found wonder even in the hardest of times. The shoes remind us of their steps, brief, hurried, sometimes cut short. And the graves remind us of the silence that fell too often when childhood ended before it had begun. Close your eyes and imagine holding one of these small shoes in your hands. The leather is stiff, the stitching faint. It once carried a child across a muddy path to fetch water or to chase after siblings. That child's name is long forgotten, but the trace remains. And through it, we remember. The soil does not lie. It holds memory patiently until it is uncovered. And when we listen, we hear the quiet footsteps of medieval children, moving across centuries to whisper their lives to us once more. From the earth, where tiny shoes and toys lie buried, we return now to the halls of stone. Here, the children are not peasants, nor apprentices, but heirs to power, sons and daughters of the nobility. Their childhoods were not spent in fields or at looms, but under the strict gaze of tutors, priests, and attendants. Imagine a noble child seated on a wooden stool in a chamber lit by tall, narrow windows. The air smells faintly of ink and parchment. Before them rests a wax tablet or a thin book, precious and rare. A tutor, stern yet patient, guides them through the slow repetition of Latin prayers. The words are not merely lessons. They are preparation for rule, for responsibility, for the place this child must someday hold. For noble boys, training came early. Their mornings were filled with study. Latin grammar, the Psalms, histories of Rome and of Christendom. Afternoons were given to the body. Lessons in riding, hunting, handling weapons. A future knight or lord could not be idle. Discipline shaped him from dawn until dusk, as carefully as a mason shapes stone. For noble girls, the lessons were different, but no less demanding. They learned to manage households, to spin and embroider, to read prayers and sing in chapel. Above all, they were prepared for marriage, often arranged while they were still young, binding families and kingdoms together. Their education was not for their own freedom, but for the duties they would inherit as wives, mothers, or abbesses. There were moments of beauty. Music filled noble halls, and children learned to play the lute or harp, their fingers plucking soft melodies. They learned the art of conversation, the grace of gesture, the subtle craft of diplomacy. Even as children, they carried themselves with a formality beyond their years. But privilege did not shield them from sorrow. Sickness came to palaces as well as cottages. Royal nurseries knew grief as keenly as village huts, as small coffins were carried in quiet processions. For every child who grew to wield power, others faded before their destinies could be fulfilled. And so, even noble childhoods bore the mark of fragility. The difference lay not in the length of life, but in the purpose carved into it. Peasant children labored for the survival of the household. Noble children studied, trained, and prepared for the survival of the realm. Close your eyes and picture a noble child bent over a page, the flickering candlelight glinting on their serious face. Behind them, banners hang, embroidered with lions, eagles, or lilies. Outside, peasants labor in the fields, their own children carrying water, sweeping floors, herding animals. The contrast is sharp, yet both lives are bound by the same truth. Childhood was never free, never long, always shadowed by duty and fate. Now the chamber fades. The tutor's voice falls silent. The parchment is rolled and set aside. We have walked through the world of medieval childhood, the long labor of peasant children, whose days began with duty and ended in exhaustion. The lives of royal sons and daughters, like those of Eleanor of Provence, burdened from birth with destiny. The rare and fragile traces left in toys, shoes, and graves, whispers of laughter, of play, of lives cut short, and the noble education that shaped heirs into rulers, weaving their futures into the fabric of kingdoms. Childhood in the Middle Ages was a brief passage, marked more by responsibility than freedom, more by survival than innocence. It was a season of life that flickered quickly, like a candle in the wind. As you return now to the quiet of your own night, let these echoes fade. The children of the Middle Ages have long since grown silent, their footsteps gone, their voices stilled. But their memory lingers, in soil, in stories, in the rhythms of history. And as the past drifts softly into the dark, you, too, may let go. The day is finished. The world is still. Rest well.